So our presenters today are Dr. Rosemary Karen, Director of Speech and Hearing with Jefferson Parish Schools, and Leanne Vogt, who is Coordinator of Speech and Hearing. And I'm going to let them tell you a little bit more about themselves if they want, and they're going to talk to us about communication plans. So ladies, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. We are delighted to be asked to do this, and I know that this is a topic that causes confusion in many areas. So if we can clear up some things or raise some other things that need to be addressed, that would be a very helpful thing to do. I'm Dr. Rosemary Karen. I'm the Director of Speech and Hearing in Jefferson Parish. My background has been exclusively working with children with multiple disabilities over the years, worked in schools. I've been with Jefferson Parish now for 36 years. So have been in many, many settings doing whatever we do to support children's communication within the school systems. Leanne?
I'm Leanne. I came into this profession at the age of 4, I would say, because my brother entered our family and he has Down syndrome. So I've been wanting to help individuals with disabilities for a very long time. I've been a speech therapist for 17 years, and all of that has been within school districts across the southern states.
So that's our introduction for us. And we did have some meeting norms. It was turn your camera on, but obviously that's not always a practical thing to do, and camera is optional. As Sharon said, going on mute is helpful because that way we don't get a lot of extra noises in and questions in the chat box. And we do have time for questions in here. We're going to start by talking about some of the background information, and then after some questions, we have various sample kids, students that we can talk about. So you can see whether or not the communication plan would be needed or not needed. So that's our design for today. Our objectives are to provide families and others with background information related to developing a communication plan, discuss the critical components, and demonstrate how it can be developed to support a student's communication needs. And we, rather than starting with who, what, when, where, we started with why, because the communication plan was something that kind of popped up out of, without people knowing a whole lot about it ahead of time. But if you think about it seriously, communication is a lot more than talking. A lot more than talking, but most of the time when people think about communication, they think about talking. They want people to talk or write, to use words, to express their thoughts, their needs, their feelings. And school depends on words. So within schooling, you really need a lot of words. And when words becomes challenging, when you can't use words easily, you don't understand them, then your learning is less efficient. A lot of those children who are not able to use words for learning are the ones who end up in special education. And so the IEP teams or the IAP teams, like the parents, the teachers, all the related service staff and others, need to be sensitive to what the students need and plan to accommodate those needs and need to support communication. That's where the communication plan came from, really. And I see that our sizing didn't work here.
Yes.
The graphics don't ever necessarily work. Who's the communication plan for? It is required by law for deaf, hard of hearing, or deaf-blind students. That can be a primary classification or a secondary classification. Sometimes children have various multiple disabilities, and one of the involvements is that they have a hearing loss with it. So the hearing is secondary rather than primary. In all of those cases, though, a communication plan is required. For other students who have severe communication impairments, that's addressed on the IEP. They ask 2 questions. Do they have limited skills or no verbal skills? Do they have other significant impairments in language articulation, fluency, pragmatics, or auditory processing? Pretty broad, but that question is severe. So in both of those cases, you would need to consider a communication plan.
So we'll dive a little bit more into the deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf blind exceptionalities here.
Do you want to do it?
Sure.
Yeah.
So when we're considering the exceptionality of deaf or hard of hearing, we're looking at children who may have a unilateral loss. So that means just one ear is affected, or a bilateral loss would be both. It could be a severity from mild to severe, or to deaf, where they don't
Usable
have
hearing.
Yes, hearing at all.
Mhm.
We're looking at specific management plans. Do they have hearing aids? Do they have cochlear implants, FM systems? Are they using ASL for communication purposes or total communication? And then when you consider deaf blind exceptionality, you have the hearing impairment as well as the visual impairment. And it doesn't necessarily mean blind as in total loss of vision, but it could be some loss. And so you would meet the exceptionality for deaf blind. We do a screener for Usher syndrome for children who may have some hearing and visual impairments. You could be looking at other specific diagnoses as well. And then so these individuals need a high contrast of visuals and a tactile communication system. So lots of creativity for those.
And when we talk about significant communication impairments, there are two tests there, I think, on it. It says limited or no verbal skills. Within the speech and hearing, speech therapy community, within the community of people with disabilities, there's been sort of a reaction to talking about no verbal skills or calling somebody nonverbal. In fact, what we're saying is that they're non-talking. The implication of being verbal means that you have no words in your head versus I don't say any words. So the preferred term that we're using, we're not talking about he's nonverbal anymore. We just say complex communicator, because their needs for communication are more complex than the typical child who can do some talking. And so we've gotten away from nonverbal, we've gotten away from no verbal skills. Probably the most famous example would be Steve Gleason, that everybody knows about. Steve Gleason is not nonverbal. Steve Gleason has a very, very robust language system and understands everything and can create speeches. He just doesn't talk. So he's not nonverbal. You know, so it's that kind of thing. So don't say nonverbal is, I guess, the proviso on that. You may not be using spoken words, and the reason for that could be very complex. It could be something developmental, where we have overall developmental delays. It could be something physiological, some sort of disease that's been identified, or something going on that's different in the structure that prevents talking. Personal preference. There are people who do not like to talk, who do not want to participate with words, and that needs to be respected. I think there are many of our students who just don't really want to say a whole lot. And then sometimes we have, like, we don't know why. And can we understand it? Can we crack it? Not necessarily. There is one student who ended up communicating with a computer and was very, very effective. He finished at Haynes Academy. He went to Tulane. He never spoke. And part of what he was getting was some physical support of just pressure on his shoulder for him to use the computer. And the therapist working with him said, why don't you just do it yourself? You're very competent. And he said, I don't feel my hands at the ends of my arms. So whatever was going on with him sensory, he could not really get sensory feedback from his hands to be able to do it unless he had pressure on his shoulder. A very odd and unusual thing. Who can guess at that? You know, so sometimes we don't know, but we know that the person needs help. They may use different strategies for self-expression that are gestural. You know, shrugging your shoulders is a gesture, not shaking your head, pushing things away, those are gestures. Vocal tones and patterns can be used. There are behaviors sometimes that people will use. Like I said, you give it to me and I throw it on the floor. I'm obviously rejecting it. And then sometimes we have pictures and objects, which gets into more symbols, using symbols that can represent communication. Significant impairments, you want to talk about that one?
Sure. So we have students that may have significant receptive and expressive impairments. This could include pragmatics, if we're talking about receptive and expressive language. It could include auditory processing. And of course, with auditory processing, there's a lot more in-depth testing that happens, not just within the school system, but outside with audiologists. We're looking at children who have very severe articulation impairments. Maybe you've heard the word apraxia, where they have difficulty coordinating the oral motor movements to produce words or sounds. So those are the significant impairments we're referring to. So we need to know, what does the child need to do to be understood in the classroom? And does the child have effective communication skills to be able to express his wants and needs to an unfamiliar person? So who's involved in developing the communication plan? Well, it's the IEP team. It's not just the speech professional, but they do provide their input when they're on the case, of course, and their expertise. But it's the team, it's the teacher, it's the parents, any other related service providers, maybe APE, PT, OT, social work services.
But it is not necessary. And I think this is one of the things that has happened, is that a lot of times it was just handed off to the speech therapist as a piece of paper and said, you go do this. If this is being done in the spirit of what was intended, you're going to have more discussion rather than just having the SLP do it.
So again, we're just a reminder of what is a communication plan and how it came about from Act 250 in 2015. It was based upon the revisions of the Deaf Child Bill of Rights. And we are aware that there's some pending legislation out there for a communication bill of rights. So I would expect this communication plan to become even more popular.
Yes, yes, as a result of that.
Yes. So this is of course, to be in compliance with DHH and deafblind students for their IEP, which is the Individualized Education Plan, or their IAP, which is Individualized Accommodation Plan. So it's a method of assuring that communication needs are considered. It does not take the place of the IEP, but it adds to the components of the IEP.
And it's important to recognize that the communication plan is like a blueprint that will then inform what gets put onto the IEP. It does not replace the IEP. It should not be so extensive that the IEP cannot be a summary of it and say these are the things that are important there.
So in SER, which is our state education reporting system, there's a guideline for us to put into the general student information section for communication needs. And it states that the communication needs of the student, and in the case of a student who is deaf or hard of hearing, the student's language and communication needs, opportunities for direct communications with peers and professional personnel, and the student's language and communication mode, academic level, and full range of needs. So we're covering a lot of information within the communication needs section. And that the student has opportunities for direct instruction in his or her language and communication mode.
It's part of the reason that this was included there is that this is what the state has as their guidance. The other side of it is it's kind of dense to look at. And so we're going to try to tease out some of these components for you so you can see how they make sense. Because when I look at all of those words together in one sentence, I get kind of overwhelmed.
Very overwhelmed.
So we want to tease some of that out.
Yes.
Okay.
So we said the IEP members are providing input. So who's providing what? So from the school level, the school is providing background information about the curriculum and the environment and the grade level expectations. Then you'll have the expertise from the professionals that are working with the child and their recommendations for plans of services.
And the parents give information about the child at home. What we're asking for is honesty from the parents, because this is a partnership. You know, parents have expectations about what they want their child to do, but we ask that they have an open mind to the school is not going to necessarily work miracles. And on the expectations, a lot of times we hear from parents, I want him to come home and tell me what happened at school today. And that may be something
Very
that parents
difficult.
want. That is a very difficult thing to accomplish, because school is school and children see school as one place and home is home, and they want to keep them separate. And that is not a disability related behavior. That is a very typical child behavior. I'd say a human behavior. I don't really want to talk about work when I get home,
Right.
because my husband doesn't understand all the people that I work with and who they are and what their roles are. And it's just not worth trying to explain it to him. So I'd rather not talk about work. Thank you very much. That's kind of where kids are a lot of times. School is school and home is home. And you're not going to get oh, guess what happened in school today, mommy? From 99.9% of kids, if not higher. So those may be the expectations, but let's have an open mind about whether or not we can actually accomplish that in school. We try, but the information about the child at home, what does he really do? You know, is he able to ask for things? What languages are you speaking and how is he speaking? And what are we doing to make that connection between home and school? So in the areas that have to be considered on the communication plan, there is the communication needs, the language needs, and the full range of needs. Those are three things to look at. Okay. On communication needs, there is the mode of communication. What type of way are we going to be communicating? Children may speak and use words, single words, multi-word sentences, imitation, that kind of thing. Hand leading, well, yeah, or gestures, or taking you, if they take you to where they want to get something. Do they have pointing? Do they use pictures? What is their mode of communication? And similarly, what are they able to do at school? What are they doing at home? Grade level expectations are always there. Now, what is the grade level of the child? Realistically, they may be 5th grade age, but they may not be on a 5th grade curriculum. So we have to balance those sorts of things. What kind of testing is being done in the classroom? We are approaching LEAP testing, and that becomes a big thing, but we have to accommodate children's needs within their communication needs in the testing. And what kind of technology are they using? Is it high tech, low tech, mid tech? Are they using tech at all? Or is there something else going on? So we don't have answers, but we just say, this needs to be looked at. Language needs?
You're looking at their language needs. You can get a lot of information from their either initial evaluation or their reevaluation through authentic measures of their strengths and weaknesses. Not every child can be tested in a traditional standardized formal measure. So we may try that as speech pathologists, but then we look at totality of how they're communicating through nonverbal and verbal communication needs. We look at where their current levels of performance are. So if they've been getting services, what's their progress reports say about their communication skills and how it impacts their educational access. How does it impact their ability to make their wants, needs, and ideas known to unfamiliar people? And then we develop goals and objectives based upon that information.
And then there is the full range of needs, because beyond the school-based specific, yeah, we have school-related activities, there are also other considerations, such as opportunities for peer interaction. That should be there. It is not exclusively a communication need. Children should be able to interact with their peers. And again, I'm thinking there are some people who don't want to do a whole lot of socializing. So we can bring them along and we can try to keep them involved, but we also can't force to the point of pain that they have to be with other people. There are times when I want to be alone, and that's needs to be respected at times. What kind of emotional stress comes out of them being able to express their needs or not? And is it only that? Sometimes there are other factors that will make me feel stressed, and it has nothing to do with my communication skills. It's something else sensory is going on, for example, that's just driving me crazy.
Okay, so our next steps, we've made all of our identification of the student and what they need for communication purposes. So the team has to develop the plan, the communication plan, based upon goals and objectives. We will outline how the student will communicate with others and how others will communicate back with the student. And this is included in the IEP and the IAP under the communication needs section, and through, of course, goals and objectives. And this document should be shared if we have paraprofessionals working with the children, because they're not always sitting in the meeting providing input, but they need to be implementing the plan as well. Or if the student goes to aftercare, then those individuals working with the student there need to be aware of how to communicate, how the student will communicate with them, and then how to communicate back.
One of the things I want to point out, though, is that all of this that we've discussed in the last 4 or 5 slides is only to get you to the point where you can fill out the box that says communication needs on that part of the IEP. You know, space is limited on an IEP, and they say you can only fill in so many symbols and characters. So you end up trying to summarize all of this on the actual IEP. So it's not like everything can be put in there. When are you going to complete the communication plan? At the IEP or the IAP, at an amendment, consider it at the initial or annual meeting if the plan is needed, because it's not needed for everybody. I think that's one of the challenges that we have. It doesn't belong, just because you have X for your classification, you don't necessarily need it, except if you're deaf, hard of hearing, or deaf blind.
That's your little, your little reminders. There's your required. And then those with significant communication impairments. Okay, so the state has a very lengthy communication plan on Louisiana Believes. This is what our communication plan looks like in Jefferson Parish. So currently, yes, we are in revisions.
We are revising it. I think the important thing, though, is the communication plan is a addendum to the IEP. It is the form that is provided that you can download from the IEP format, is a suggested way to do it. It is very, very, very extensive. That form is not required. Your LEA determines what form they will use. In Jefferson, we looked at the form and said, what is the essence of it? What are the important factors that need to be pulled together? And how do we address them in a simpler format than 16 pages? And And that's where we came up with the 2-page, as I said, we're revising it, and it will be probably
More.
3 to 4 pages. But we want to have something that is not going to take the whole meeting. Okay, so you may be at a district that says, no, we'll use the one that the state has. You may be in a district that has created an entirely different form. It's okay, because what's important on the communication plan is that you have documentation that you've considered these different aspects that the child needs. Okay, so now we're at questions.
Yes, we do have questions.
Have we gotten questions yet? Because our next section is going to be looking at different students and using them as samples.
I don't have any questions yet in the chat box. I do appreciate, however, I was telling Leanne before we started that my son is a non-speaker, and I really appreciate how you made that distinction between people who have no thoughts, no words in their head,
Yes.
and people who just don't put their voice to speech. Because he is definitely a thinker and he is very smart, although unfortunately he was not categorized as such in school, but he's very bright. And just because he doesn't speak doesn't mean he doesn't have a lot to say. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and that is something that has come out very, very strongly from the autism community and from the AAC community. AAC being augmentative alternative communication. So people who are not talking, but doing something else that supports or replaces their communication. They have a lot to say. We just have to give them the opportunity to say it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So carrying on, then let's look at student number 1.
Student number 1, it has an exceptionality of hard of hearing. With a moderate hearing loss, the student wears hearing aids. He or she is in all general education classes with resource supports and is an average B student. So considering what this student's language and communication needs might be, I would say he or she is likely communicating verbally
with words,
spoken words. Does he or she have opportunities to communicate within the setting? Absolutely. He or she probably is able to make wants, needs, ideas, feelings known to unfamiliar people. They have opportunities to interact with peers, participate in classroom discussions, interact with professionals in the classroom. Classroom considerations, we may have some hearing supports in the classroom, maybe some FM systems for the student to connect with the hearing aids.
preferential
seating. Communication supports, probably visuals, but maybe not as, visual supports as in like organizational supports, help with vocabulary development, writing, organization.
I mean, if this was the child you're dealing with, I think we can look at that and say, wow, doing pretty well considering the range of what we deal with. And so does this kid need a communication plan? Yes or no? Can we have a vote in
the chat?
In the chat on that? And how's the chat looking? Okay.
Pop it up for us. Sharon, can you share what's in the chat?
Oh, I'm sorry. You can't really see it, can you?
No, we can't see it.
Apologize for that. We have a yes, we have maybe, and judging from what you said earlier about the law saying that certain students have to have a communication plan, I'll put my vote in as yes.
Yes is the correct answer.
Woohoo!
And the correct answer is not coming up.
Why won't it do that? Okay, let's see if we can do that.
Nope.
Uh-oh.
I wonder if we need this now. Oh, oh gosh, we're frozen. Ah, there it is, yes.
Okay,
But the communication plan, yes, because he's hard of hearing, it's required. But primarily what will be on it will be accommodations. Because this child has something that's already effective. We can look at his communication needs and the opportunities he has and like, hey, this is one where we're doing a pretty good job. Yay, us. So that part's good. Okay. Student 2 is deaf. Profound hearing loss. Hearing aids are not helpful. Now, in Jefferson, we have what are called hub schools, where we have more of the children, we have a cluster of children who are deaf, hard of hearing, who go there because they require support with ASL. They need some specialized teaching, and so they can work together and get more specialized strategies together. So this student is attending a hub school and is working in the general ed curriculum with an ASL interpreter, is making progress, not solid B student. But what do we know about language and communication needs? What is the preferred language for this child? Probably ASL, because that's what the child is making sense of with American Sign Language. He's learning that. One of the things that's important when we have the discussion there is, where is he learning ASL besides at school? Where is he using it besides at school? Ideally, he would be doing it at home also. The family would be learning ASL. Potentially, he was born into a family that is in the deaf culture, and that family will, then ASL would be his first language, and that would be his home language, and that would be the one that he'd be strongest in. Many children have hearing parents who then choose to learn ASL or maybe not so keen on it. Then we have a gap between the communication at home and the communication at school. And that's where honesty is important, for the families to say, I can't do that. We need something else that's going to help. We have to find another strategy. What opportunities does this child have for communication? He's got a peer group that is also deaf, hard of hearing, so an ASL interpreter. So there are others around who will be able to communicate with ASL, but he also has opportunities to mix with typical peers. So there are a lot of good social opportunities and opportunities for communication. What about in the classroom? He's going to need visual supports. He's going to need adapted materials, probably any videos or things that are shown on the board are going to need captions, and what kind of communication support is he going to need? What are we putting on the plan? Do we need to do a plan for this child? And I'm sorry, we didn't have the technical skill here to embed a poll and just say, do it.
That's okay.
But
We have yeses on this one as well.
absolutely.
absolutely.
And I have a question about that.
Okay.
Related service is isn't parent education or parent training and related service? Could the ASL fit into that, or is that not possible?
I know that within our district, we do not have in conjunction with, there are teacher shortages, there are shortages of everything under the sun within education. There are great shortages of ASL interpreters. However, so we don't have enough hired by us, and we contract with an agency. That agency also provides ASL classes for parents at no cost, but the parents need to avail themselves of it. So yes, we can do that. Is that something that falls under the IEP? I don't know. I'd say the parents need the willingness.
So was your question if ASL interpreters fall under related service providers?
I was actually, let me make sure I'm on. I was actually wondering if you said that there is a disconnect between the language in the home and the language at school, if the child is using ASL and the family is not.
Mhm.
So I was wondering if that could fall under parent training, and if parent training in ASL could be on the IEP as a, as a parent training.
I think it could be mentioned, but but the opportunity is all that the schools could offer.
Right. Yeah, you can't make them learn, but that was what I was wondering, is because a lot of times parents, especially before the child gets into the school system, and when they just find out the child has a hearing loss or maybe deaf, you know, as you say, there is such a shortage, and just
Yes.
knowing that the resource is there for them to be able to take advantage of the classes, I was just wondering if that is part of it, if the parent, making the parent aware of the services that are available for them.
And of course, that's, we're a large district in Jefferson. But I know that there are also opportunities online that parents could learn that. YouTube all the time has it. And at least that's a start. And this is something that we really need to support a child like this with the ASL, because that will be the way that this child will be going probably. So we need to consider that. Now, this child, number 3,
Deaf blind is the exceptionality. So we have both visual and hearing losses. Child wears cochlear implants and is within a pre-K special education classroom. So, in regards to, let's consider language and communication needs, likely this child has significant delays in language and communication. He's likely getting speech pathology services. The opportunities for communication amongst peers would be in the special education class. And as far as, what mode of communication the child is using, it could be sign, it could be some attempts at making words,
it could be visual.
visuals.
There are high contrast visual is typically with a dark background rather than having the light background. Use a dark background and then have bright colors for the pictures on it. So that could be accommodated.
Tactile.
And tactile 3D sorts of symbols for things. You don't have to use full objects. You can use a smaller spoon or something like that. So there are ways that we can provide stuff. There's also a particular kind of sign language that is for people who are deafblind, where it's tactile. And I know very little sign to start with, and I know even less that is tactile. But it is possible. It is possible that we can address those needs in that way. We just need to identify on this communication plan, which we maybe or maybe not will be doing, that yes, we need to go in this direction. Because in all of these, we need to identify what the child needs. What kind of support does the child need?
And for this particular child, it's very important for all individuals in the IEP team to be on the same page and to be using the same methods, so that if he's using a tactile system, then that's consistent and that's what represents the meaning of the word. And then of course they'll be learning Braille on top of.
Quite possibly. And keeping in mind that the vision and hearing losses are both what legally qualifies you as visually impaired, but not, legally blind. It can be different from being blind. Hearing loss versus totally deaf are 2 different things. So there may well still be sensory input. It's just at a reduced level. And cochlear implants are sometimes helpful and sometimes not. There's a lot of complexity to using. It's not just an automatic, I could put my glasses on and my vision is better. It's not the same with hearing, and cochlear implants is even more complex. So that when you're doing the cochlear implant, what's done is that the actual hearing mechanism in the ear, whatever is there, is bypassed with a computer processor that has to be worn, that feeds the sounds to the 8th auditory nerve, the eighth cranial nerve. And then the brain has to learn to use this. And so there's a mapping thing. So it takes like 9 months of daily wearing of the cochlear implant before the brain has figured out what all these sounds mean. So inconsistent use means it's not as effective as it could be. So, you think, oh yeah, that'll do it. That'll fix the hearing. It's not always like that. So it's very complex. So in this child, do we do a communication plan?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, obviously, this one is pretty definite. Yes, we need to address the presentation of materials as well as the mode of expression, the mode of input, and giving the child lots of opportunities for communication. I know that I'm sure I'm not saying anything new to you all, but children who have significant challenges as they're little can have a lot of stuff done for them, and they can learn to be helpless. They can learn to play on it, and then they don't have to make that extra effort to do X, Y, and Z unless they're given those opportunities and really left to figure it out for themselves. Learned helplessness is one of the challenges that we deal with as kids get older, because they've already learned, if I pretend I can't do it, or if I don't try, or it's too much effort, I'm not blaming them at all. This is human. Somebody else will come in and do it for me. And that's, yeah, and that's doesn't build independence there. All right.
All right, so student number 4 has been identified as other health impaired. He or she has a medical diagnosis of cerebral palsy with resulting physical challenges. The child is non-speaking. He uses a VOD, which is a voice output device, effectively. He has intact hearing, vision, and cognition, and is primarily within the inclusion classrooms. So considering this child, he sounds like we have good language skills, but good receptive language skills, but expressive communication is impacted, likely has articulation impacts as well. So, may be able to say some words that are intelligible to familiar listeners, but not necessarily to unfamiliar listeners. So that's why the voice output device is being used effectively. This child has opportunities for communication, and we need to continuously provide those opportunities. And he has opportunities for communication with peers as well as the adults in the setting. But the way he became so effective on his voice output device is because of the opportunities given to him to practice. Oftentimes when children are using the voice output devices, it'll come with the speech therapist, and then if it's left in the classroom, sometimes it disappears because other children want to quote unquote play on it. It is enticing, I would say, but
or you're afraid it'll get broken, and
Right.
that costs a lot of money.
Batteries die and they're not replaced. So when those things happen, that limits the opportunities for the child to use the communication system. So that also, this is why it's important to extend the communication plan past those and people within the IEP team meeting. Classroom considerations, this child
Is it inclusion?
is in inclusion. We have
So the regular ed teachers are going to have to step up and accommodate the communication needs. They cannot pretend he's not there. This is where it's like child needs to be involved in all of the classroom activities, interacting with peers, interacting with in all the activities, because this is a child who can do it, who has already demonstrated a lot of desire, because you don't get successful if you don't want to. But anyway, moving on then, the types of communication support we would give him. He's got the VOD the voice output device, which is good. We're not stopping there. What is the other vocabulary he's going to need? What else can we do to help him? All of this is involved. Now, for this kid, do we need a communication plan? Yes or no?
Yes.
I'm saying, well, maybe, because maybe he's already so effective. And I'm thinking of the Steve Gleason kind of thing. If this is a mini Steve Gleason, what else is there that we need to do?
I'm just thinking if the voice output device dies or fails or is not available, what other supports would be put in place for the child to communicate effectively? That's why I leave it yes.
So right there, we don't have a universal like, oh yeah, all the time. And I think that's important to recognize. Let's look at the things that the child needs. Let's look at him individually. Let's look at how he's functioning. This child has probably had an IEP for a very long time, so we can build on that and then say, what does he need? And, you know, do we have to fill out the long form, or do we already have enough information that we can say, hey, we've got an effective communicator here, and let's work with that. You know, but he's a good example.
Yeah.
Take this one.
Oh, this is my precious brother, student number 5.
Who's not in 3rd grade anymore.
No, he's not. He's a very big adult. So this is 3rd grade Matthew. He has Down syndrome. He loves to communicate, and that is through verbal and nonverbal means. He can speak in phrases and short sentences. His speech can be sometimes difficult to understand to unfamiliar listeners. He's within a SPED classroom with some inclusion. So language and communication needs, of course, he's getting support from speech therapists, but also he needs supports with vocabulary, participating in classroom discussions, social interactions with peers. And my parents fought for him to have opportunities for communication across the school setting. So of course he is with his non-disabled peers and with his peers that have similar needs as he does. Classroom considerations, he's in that SPED classroom, and then with some push-in supports for some other classes. He has picture symbols, of course, within those SPED classrooms. They have visual schedules. There may be some voice output devices to make requests that are not common. And then they take some picture symbols or communication devices with them to the lunch table so that there's also some more interactions available. So does he need a communication plan? I put no.
Okay, this is Leanne's vote on her own brother.
I said no. He's able to effectively communicate his wants, needs, and ideas to unfamiliar people. While it's sometimes difficult to understand him, he's able to use other means to make sure his listeners understand his desires and feelings.
And part of that was because of his engagement.
Yes.
That, you know, so you need to look at the full child and what he's able to do. But this is somebody who knows this child very intimately. And she says, no, his communication skills, albeit affected, were still very functional. And that's one of the first concerns, I think. We didn't ask y'all for your votes on that there.
Well, a question there on someone with similar needs. If your parents had been concerned about his ability to communicate with those who didn't know him well, could they have pushed for a communication plan to be added?
Well, I think my parents were very happy with the way that his communication needs were being met through his IEP. You know, and we call him famous. He considers himself famous. The kid was, you know, going down the hallways, telling everyone hello, greeting people. He was able to pick up on life skills that he needed to have when he transitioned over to his job placements. So as far as needing an additional communication plan, I don't think my parents would have pushed for one.
I think the thing about the communication plan in itself on that kind of thing, if the parents have that concern, they can say, wait, we're looking for these things to be addressed in his communication. Is a piece of paper with a plan written on it, is it necessary? You're saying no, not in that setting
Not in
because
our
of the
situation.
communication between the parents and the school and the particular child. I think the important thing is that conversation can take place, whether it is formalized on a piece of paper or not. It needs to take place so that the school knows the parents' expectations and what they hope would happen for their child, as well as the parents recognize what the school is able to provide. And if they can't provide that extra bit, then why not? And then we have that discussion. I would prefer to have the school and the parents have an open conversation to these sorts of things and to make the plans together about what's going to happen on the IEP. Because the communication plan papers are only supporting what we're going to write on the IEP. What we write on the IEP is what's important. So,
and when you look at those questions about whether or not he had no or limited verbal skills, that was a no. He had absolute, he was communicating with phrases in short sentences. And did he have a significant impairment in articulation? No, he had a moderate impairment in articulation. So his utterances were able to be distinguished. And of course, he used body language and gestures and emotions to also help relay how he was feeling. So to an unfamiliar listener and communication partner, he could communicate his wants, his needs, and his feelings effectively.
Moving to student 6. Oh, and it says student 5. Oop, we missed one. This is 6. Okay, this is number 6. This is a kindergarten age student, so 5 years old, with autism, but has delays in multiple domains, has sensory challenges that are significant, occasionally uses 1 or 2 words, but typically is not talking. What do we want to do for this child? What are his language and communication needs? Can we expect comparable vocabulary and as a typical 5-year-old with him? We can't, probably not, because he has delays in many domains, in many areas. He's generally got developmental delays, and the sensory challenges are affecting what's going in and how he's dealing with it and what is going on. So do we need to look at his language skills? Yes, but not exclusively divorced from who the child is. What are his opportunities for communication? He probably is starting at school. He may have been home. He may have been in a daycare. He may have been in an ABA center, but typically at 5, they're starting to come into school. And what kinds of opportunities with peers, with typical peers, with other children with autism, what kind of interaction does he even desire? Because very often, if this is his first time in school, it's a pretty scary place and he doesn't know what he's getting into, and he may want to pull back into himself as a result of that. So we need to look at those things. What kind of considerations of the classroom are needed to support him? Will he be on the general ed curriculum, or will he be on a different curriculum? How will the curriculum be addressed? What opportunities does he have to socialize with others in that setting? And the communication supports that he needs, what are they? Probably visuals, potentially a voice output device. We just don't know everything. This is where we would delve into it more on our next session in May.
Yes.
There. Now, this one, it really depends on the whole child as to whether the communication jumps out as the key thing that, oh, we need that communication plan, or, are there other things in the way? I'm concerned about the sensory challenges.
Mhm.
How can we address his sensory to get him in a calmer place so
Right.
that he can actually start learning? Because until you're in a calm place where your brain is attentive, you can't really start learning language effectively.
Yes. And does he have communicative intent? Sometimes with children with autism, they, like Rosemary said, want to be within themselves. So trying to get them to communicate with us is very challenging.
It can be a little too much. So does he need it? I would say probably yes, but
You have to
maybe
consider
we need
everything.
to consider the whole child. And our last one here is another student with autism who's sixth grade age, speaks in sentences up to 5 or 6 words, completes his academic work at the second grade level. So he's slower down. The biggest challenge we've got going on is behavioral outbursts. He is not settling down. He is at all. He is attacking people. He is hitting. He is throwing things, destroying classrooms. It's a big behavioral thing. What are his language and communication needs? He's got some basic skills.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like if he can speak up to 5 and 6 words, then he's likely able to effectively communicate his wants, his needs, his feelings.
I mean, he can say, no, I don't want it, which
Mm-hmm.
could be respected or not respected, depending on the situation. Does he have opportunities for communication within a classroom like this? Probably so. We have to look into that, certainly, but see what are the opportunities for him? How is the classroom set up to support him? And what are the communication supports does he have? Does he need a communication plan? I'd like y'all to vote on this one. Get some feelings back in on that. Get some thoughts. Yes or no on this child?
I'll vote yes.
Okay.
I don't have any other votes yet. All right, everybody. Vote now. Y, N, M for maybe.
Uh-huh. Yes, no,
Who's
maybe.
next?
Okay, why did you say
Maybe
yes?
have a yes. Because they speak up. Hey, Ernie. Sorry, my son just got home. He only speaks a few words. Is below grade level. And obviously has language issues. Behavioral outbursts in the school setting could be indicative of poor communication, frustration over not being able to communicate their needs. So I would say yes.
Mhm.
So I think where maybe some miscommunication is happening is when we say speaks up to 5 to 6 words, that's per utterance. So per sentence, per se.
That's not his full
That's
range
not
of
full range of
vocabulary.
vocabulary.
This is a child who will use 5 or 6 word sentences.
Gotcha. Sorry, I misunderstood that.
Okay, so yeah, I appreciate that. So yeah, it was not clear. And that's a good point to bring up because we don't count vocabulary like that.
Oh, no, not
But when
anymore.
we're hearing somebody use a 6-word sentence, then we're like, okay, you've got a pretty good basis of things. There's at least there is at least a 10-to-1 ratio between spoken words and understanding words, receptive vocabulary, if you're doing expressive vocabulary, receptive. So a child who has a 10-word expressive vocabulary that you hear typically will have 100 words that they understand. A child with 50 words will have 500 that they understand. So you start growing. So somebody who's putting 5 words or 6 words into a sentence is showing us that they've probably got several thousand words that they're understanding. So for that child, we'd say, you've got a basis of your language in there.
And again, consider, is this child able to effectively communicate his wants, needs, and feelings to an unfamiliar person? And does he have limited or no verbal skills? So I would have to say no on the limited verbal skills. He has a lot of language, actually. It may not be up to par with other sixth graders, but for him, he has enough language to communicate effectively. So I would vote no on the communication plan. Behavioral outbursts maybe needed to be addressed through the BIP or through social work services.
You see somebody like this, I look at whether or not they're able to calm themselves, because we hear behavior is communication. Yes, it is. If I get up and walk out of the room, I have demonstrated to you I don't want to be here. But that's, that's okay. If I throw something on the ground, I'm showing you I don't want it. It doesn't have anything to do with my language. I am using my actions to say I don't want. A child who's talking in 6-word utterances is capable of saying I don't want. What can happen is that they go from I'm a little bit annoyed to I'm so spitting mad that I just can't say anything. I am so, in which case a communication plan won't be able to address that. That is a self-regulation strategy.
Which happens to many people.
Yeah, which happens to many people.
For children with disabilities.
So we are commonly seeing kids hitting early adolescence, maybe, starting some physical changes in their bodies, which doesn't make sense. I mean, nobody likes the stuff that goes on when you're a preteen, because it just doesn't feel right, and your body's changing and growing, and these hormones are there, and you feel grumpy and you're getting moody. This sort of stuff going on is part of the development there. And you have all of this stuff annoying you, and you just get, that's not a communication need. That is how do you handle what you feel inside as things aren't right? Do you see that difference?
I do, yes.
So there are times where we're being pushed into, give him more speech therapy. But speech therapy won't help him when
he needs to regulate himself.
All of a sudden he's very upset and he needs to do some regulation, some self-regulate on the spot, in the moment. And the communication plan isn't necessarily going to do it either, because we need to figure out how can he learn to regulate. We need to support his behavior. We need to give him other ways to deal with frustration. So in conclusion, the communication plan is intended to inform the discussion. It's required for the deaf, hard of hearing, the deaf blind, and for those with a severe communication impairment. It's hard to tease out what severe is, because it's going to be in the eye of the beholder, which is why we kept saying maybe, maybe not on kids. The plan as it stands is a supplementary document to the IEP, and the information from it gets incorporated under his communication needs, under the accommodation plan, under assistive technology, under the goals. That's what really lays it out and drives what's going to happen with the child. So it's valuable. It's very valuable to think about it, discuss it, consider it. I don't know whether this is illuminating it or not, but I think we're at least having that discussion for y'all. We want to thank you very much for your time and listening. And if you have more questions, please weigh in now. May 7th, Leanne and I will be doing another webinar for you on supporting communication development. So we'll see you in a month there.
Yes,
questions come up?
Y'all mark your calendars for May 7th. We'll be back to do a follow-up to this presentation. Any questions? You can either open your mic or type them into the chat. We did have one earlier on one of the slides, we had the question, what does total communication mean? That was on the earlier slide.
Okay, that,
Very good question.
yeah, thank you. Everybody has jargon and they get used to doing it. When people are deaf, one of the recommended strategies is to use total communication, which means that I, as the teacher, can be teaching using words that are English spoken words, but we're also signing. Sign language is a separate language that has its own grammar. So in sign, you would say tree green rather than green tree. But I will still be saying it in English. I will still be using, occasionally they will finger spell a word that they don't have a sign for. So total communication means that we will use every strategy available, be it facial expressions, body language, signing, and using words, so that anything and everything can go in. So if they can learn to do some speech reading and read what's going on, what I'm saying, we'll go for that, as well as the signing. So that's total communication. It's all modalities at once.
Thank you for that explanation.
And you see, we take for granted that everybody knows what that is. Same with ASL, is American Sign Language. And we have a number of students who are Spanish speaking at home and coming to school. And of course, the curriculum is taught in English, and they are deaf, hard of hearing, and so they're learning ASL as well. So they're actually trilingual because they're learning 3 languages. So it's another level of learning for them.
That's amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I have dropped the link for our brief survey in the chat box for you. So if you wouldn't mind grabbing that before we get off, I will be sending you a follow-up email with the information that I received from Dr. Karen and Leanne. So look for that in your inbox. And if you have any questions, feel free to pass them to me, or when you get the slide deck, you will have their contact information as well. You can communicate directly with them. Do you have is the communication plan, I think you said this earlier, but is it like a document that we can download or that we can get a copy of, that like the blank one that you start with?
I mean, we can share what we have. I would say.
Okay, because I would like to just see what that.
Yes, and I would suggest that people that are across the state ask around in their different districts as to what's being done on the communication plan. It's because parishes are handling it differently from district to district.
Gotcha.
The state has only mandated that it needs to be done in certain cases. They have not mandated a particular form on it.